Mountain man saved. Dying woman from blizzard. The maps she carried started a war. The blizzard came down the mountains like a white beast, silent, brutal, and without mercy. It swallowed the trees, buried trails, erased everything but cold. And in the middle of that white nothingness, he found her. Silas Boone wasn't a man who went looking for strangers. He liked his solitude. His cabin sat near the timberline, past where even wolves dared to roam. Folks in the nearest town called him the Ghost of Bitter Ridge. Part myth, part warning. But he wasn't a ghost. He was a man who'd lost too much, so he chose silence instead of sorrow. On that morning, he had gone out to check his traps. Snow was waist-deep, wind howling like it meant to tear the sky in two. But something unusual caught his eye. A crooked shape off the path, half buried in white. At first, he thought it was a downed elk. Then it moved. She was nearly frozen. Skin pale, lips blue, clothes torn at the shoulder and soaked through. But still breathing, he dug her out, fast and rough. Wrapped her in the heavy buffalo coat from his back and hauled her up in his arms like a sack of flour. She didn't speak, couldn't, but just before her eyes closed, she whispered something only the storm could hear. "Don't let them find me." Back at his cabin, Silas worked fast. He built the fire high, placed heated stones at her feet, and wrapped her in thick quilts. He crushed herbs for tea and spooned broth between her lips as she stirred in and out of fevered sleep. It took 2 days before she spoke again. Even then, her voice was dry, rough as bark. "Where am I?" "Safe," Silas said simply. She tried to sit up, failed. "You carried me." "I did." "Why?" Silas shrugged. "Didn't feel like burying a stranger." Her name, she said, was Eleanor Marsh. But she didn't say where she came from, or why she'd been out in the storm alone. Not yet. Silas didn't press. He wasn't a man of questions, but he noticed things. The way she flinched when the wind howled. The way her hand never left the satchel she'd arrived with, even when half-conscious. The way she watched the trees, like someone might come out of them with blood in their eyes. Days passed. The storm eased. The air grew clearer. Eleanor grew stronger. She helped with chores, tried to cook, badly, and started teasing him in small, surprising ways. "You don't smile much," she said once, peeling potatoes beside the hearth. Silas grunted. "Never had much reason. Maybe I'll give you one." He didn't respond, but that night, he smiled to himself when she wasn't looking. Then, one morning, while Silas was chopping firewood, Eleanor sat by the window, unfastened the flap of her satchel, and unrolled a leather-bound scroll. It was a map, old, hand-inked, marked with faded trails and mountains. But what stood out were the red slashes across certain valleys, places untouched by towns, places known only to the oldest families and trappers. And under one mark, written in careful ink, gold vein, undocumented. "Do not disclose." Eleanor's face hardened. She wasn't just lost, she was running. And what she carried was worth killing for. The air was quieter after the blizzard, but it wasn't peaceful. Not really. It was the kind of quiet that warned you something was listening. Eleanor knew that kind of silence. She had grown up reading it, first in books, later in rooms where rich men whispered with teeth behind smiles. Silas, on the other hand, was still trying to pretend nothing had changed. He didn't ask about the map, didn't mention the red slashes or the faded ink. But she saw it in the way he watched her now. Measured, steady, not unkind, just alert. As if he was waiting for her to trust him, or betray him. That evening, Eleanor sat on the log bench near the stove, steam rising from the pot of rabbit stew. Her satchel was close, but the map now tucked away again. She stirred the stew absently. Silas finally said, without looking at her, "They after you? Because of what's in that bag?" Eleanor didn't blink. "Yes." "Gold?" She hesitated, then nodded. "And something more." Silas leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. "You bring a war into my cabin, Miss Marsh?" She looked at him, really looked, and said softly, "No, Mr. Boone. The war was already coming. I just got caught standing between the wrong men and the truth." She told him that night, in pieces, between spoonfuls of stew and the cracking of the fire. The map had belonged to her father, a cartographer who'd once been hired by a mining company out of Kansas City. He'd been tasked with surveying the northern range, mapping potential routes and resources. What he found wasn't just a gold vein. It was proof that several existing mines had been built illegally, on unclaimed native land, ignored by treaties. When he refused to lie about the location, he was found dead at the base of a ravine. They called it an accident. Eleanor never believed it. She'd stolen the maps before they could be buried, ran north, tried to disappear, until the storm nearly did the job for them. Now she was here, with him, and the world outside wasn't going to let her stay hidden for long. Silas sat in silence after she finished. Then he stood, stoked the fire, and said simply, "Tomorrow we move. Cabin's too exposed." She blinked. "You believe me?" He looked over his shoulder. "You're still breathing, aren't you?" The next morning, Eleanor woke to find her satchel packed neatly, her coat mended, and Silas outside harnessing his old mule to a sled. "We'll head south," he said. "Old Trapper's Trail no one's used in years. Might buy us time." Eleanor stepped closer, clutching the maps. "You don't have to do this." Silas met her gaze. "Maybe not. But you didn't die in that snow. And I don't think it's 'cause you were meant to hide." By mid-morning they were moving. Through thick forest, over frozen streams. The wind sharp, the silence deeper now. But in that cold world, two things burned bright. The map that could change everything, and the quiet bond forming between a woman with too much to lose, and a man who thought he had nothing left to give. The snow deepened as they climbed higher into the timberline, each breath fogged in the air. Eleanor rode wrapped in furs on the sled, clinging to her satchel, while Silas trudged ahead, pulling the rope, his boots crunching ice with quiet force. They didn't speak much, didn't need to, but Eleanor watched him more now. How steady he moved, how he always scanned the trees, how he checked her warmth every few hours, with a glance that said more than words. He wasn't just keeping her alive, he was protecting something she hadn't felt in a long time: belonging. By the third day on the trail, they reached an abandoned trapper's cabin, tucked into a grove of pines. Half buried in snow, but the roof held. Silas cleared it in silence, then lit a fire and unpacked a few precious things. A knife, a worn flask, a tattered journal bound in buckskin. Eleanor set the map aside and warmed her hands. "You built this?" she asked. Silas nodded. "Long time ago. Why'd you leave it?" He shrugged. "Didn't need it. Until now." She smiled faintly. "You always talk this much?" Silas smirked. "Only when I'm nervous." That earned a soft laugh from her. The kind that stayed in the chest long after it faded from the air. That night, snow fell again. They sat close by the fire. Eleanor ran her fingers along the edge of the map, tracing the red slashes. "I don't know what to do with it," she said finally. "Even if I get it to the right people, they'll bury it again. Or worse." Silas didn't answer right away. Then, "You think truth matters less than danger?" She looked up. "I think truth is only worth something if someone's willing to stand for it. Even when it costs them everything." He studied her face. The worry, the grit, the fight still behind her tired eyes. "Then maybe," he said slowly, "you don't stand alone." The next morning, they weren't alone. Silas spotted the tracks first. Shallow in the snow, careful. 2 riders, maybe 3. Not animals, not hunters. Eleanor saw his face change when he looked at the prints. "Are they close?" "Close enough to mean trouble," he said. She gripped her satchel. "Then we run." Silas shook his head. "We stand smart, not panicked." They packed what they could. Silas stashed the sled, scattered footprints to mislead anyone tracking them, and led Eleanor deeper into the woods, toward a ridge he knew from years ago. "If we make the ledge by dark," he said, "we can watch who's coming. Decide what to do next." Eleanor followed without hesitation, because trust, once earned, walks beside love, long before either speaks its name. As dusk settled, they reached the overlook, and from the shadows, they saw them, 3 riders below. Black coats, one with a long rifle strapped behind his saddle. They stopped by the trapper's cabin, circled it slowly. One of them lit a match and tossed it through the window. Flames caught fast. Eleanor's fingers curled into fists. "That was where we slept," Silas nodded. "They want you afraid." She looked at him, voice quiet but fierce. "They'll need more fire than that to scare me." From behind the flames, the men didn't know they were being watched. Didn't know the map was still safe. Didn't know that the woman they tried to silence now had someone willing to fight beside her. The fire lit the sky below them, orange tongues flickering through the pines, casting long shadows on the snow-covered ridge where Silas and Eleanor crouched. The cabin was gone. Everything inside, food, kindling, blankets, up in smoke. It wasn't just destruction. It was a message. They weren't hunting her. They were flushing her out. "They want us moving," Silas said quietly. "Out in the open." Eleanor's voice was low, steady. "We're not giving them what they want." He nodded once. "We head east. I know a ravine near Devil's Backbone. Steep trail. Narrow. If they try to follow us there, they'll have to walk, and that gives us the edge." Eleanor clutched the satchel. "What about help? Lawmen?" Silas shook his head. "Town's days away. And with the weather like this, no one's coming unless they smell gold." She looked out over the burning wreckage. her breath steady now. Then we don't run. We move smart, like you said. Silas turned to her. You sure? She met his gaze. They've taken enough already. I'm not losing what we still have. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then Silas gave the faintest nod. The kind of nod that said, I've stood alone a long time. But now, not anymore. The ravine was brutal, slippery rock under shallow snow. Sharp drops, twisting paths carved by wind and time. Eleanor gripped roots and branches as she climbed. Silas ahead, always checking back for her. They stopped only once, to drink from a frozen stream and eat dried meat. No fire, no speaking, just breath and motion. When night came, they found a hollow in the rock wall. A windbreak barely wide enough for two. They huddled together, sharing a blanket and silence. The cold was cruel, but neither one flinched. And when Eleanor's hand found Silas's in the dark, he didn't pull away. They stayed in the ravine for 3 days. By the second day, Silas set traps around the ledge. Not for game, for men. No gunfire, no trails. Just signs of movement. A broken twig here. A disturbed snowbank there. They were still being followed. But whoever they were patient. Too patient. They're not bounty hunters, Silas said on the third morning. They're professionals. Military? Eleanor asked. Maybe. Or hired by someone with money. Not the kind that wants you arrested. The kind that wants you gone quietly. Eleanor touched the flap of her satchel. They know what this map means. Silas looked at her. Then it's time someone else does too. That night, under cover of darkness, they moved again. East, toward the small settlement of Red Hollow. A mining town Silas hadn't visited in 5 winters. It was risky. But it had something they needed. Telegraph lines. If they could get the map to someone beyond the hills, someone honest, someone brave, maybe this fight wouldn't be theirs alone. But Red Hollow wasn't just a waypoint. It was where Silas had buried the last man he called friend. Where a part of his past still waited. And now, Eleanor was walking straight into it. As dawn broke over the ridge, Eleanor stopped to rest on a flat stone. Silas knelt beside her, checking her boots, her hands, her breath. You holding up? I'm not porcelain, she said, smirking through chapped lips. No, he murmured. You're steel. She smiled, weary but warm. So are you. He hesitated, then said it, the first honest confession he hadn't meant to speak aloud. You make me wish I'd come down off that mountain sooner. Eleanor blinked. Then, softly, maybe the storm brought me to the only place I'd survive. And between them, in that cold, broken land, something bloomed. Not just survival. Something closer to love. Red Hollow wasn't much of a town. Not anymore. Just one crooked street of false front buildings. A saloon with missing windows. And a telegraph office that looked like it hadn't sent a message in months. Miners had once come here chasing silver. Most left chasing ghosts. But to Silas and Eleanor, it was hope with splintered floorboards. They arrived at dawn, coated in frost, eyes wary. Eleanor stayed wrapped in her fur shawl, the satchel pressed close to her chest. Silas moved ahead, his rifle across his back like a warning. They didn't speak to the townsfolk, didn't explain why they were there. They just walked to the telegraph shack at the end of the lane, where a man with wire-rimmed glasses and coal-stained fingers looked up in surprise. "You folks look like the wind tried to kill you." "Almost did," Silas replied. "We need a message sent. East. Fast." Eleanor unrolled the map on the counter. "Send word to the land office in Denver. Code it if you have to. Tell them Eleanor Marsh is alive. The map exists, and it confirms illegal mining on native protected ground." The telegraph operator stared at her, then at Silas, then back to the map. "You sure you want that kind of trouble?" Eleanor smiled thinly. "Sir, I've already got it. It took 2 hours to send the full message." The wires crackled, the machine tapped, and outside, the wind changed. Silas kept watch near the saloon. Eleanor waited on the steps of the telegraph office, watching the road. And that's when they came. Not on horseback, not in broad daylight, but through the crowd. 3 men, plain clothes, calm faces, but their eyes locked on Eleanor, like wolves sniffing blood. Silas saw them too late. The first lunged for the satchel. Eleanor spun, drove her knee into his side, but the second grabbed her arm. Silas was already moving, his shoulder crashing into one of them hard enough to crack bone. Fists flew, boots scuffed gravel. A gun slipped free and clattered on the wood steps. And then, bang! Everyone froze. The telegraph operator stood in the doorway, a shotgun aimed high. "That's enough," he barked. "This woman just made her message official. You touch her again, and this whole town will know your names by supper." The men backed off, slow, snarling, beaten not by bullets, but by the weight of exposure. Eleanor's chest heaved. Her knuckles bled, but she still held the map. Silas looked at her, jaw tight. "You all right?" She gave him a shaky nod. "I've been worse." He touched her cheek, just once, thumb brushing a streak of soot. "You're fire," he murmured. "No one's putting you out." That night, they slept in a borrowed room above the saloon. For the first time in days, they had real walls, warm water, and something close to quiet. Eleanor sat at the window, looking out over the dark hills. Silas joined her, wrapping the blanket tighter around her shoulders. "You think they'll come again?" she asked. "They won't stop," he said. "But now, the truth's moving faster than they are." She looked up at him, eyes tired, but filled with something fierce. "I didn't come out here looking for you, Silas." "I know, but I don't think I'd be breathing if I hadn't found you." Silas took her hand, calloused to calloused. "And I don't think I'd be living if I hadn't found you." Far away, in a Denver office, lit by gaslight, the message arrived. Maps, names, coordinates, and just below the final line, "Witness, Eleanor Marsh, protected by Silas Boone." Trouble had begun, but so had justice. And in a town barely holding itself upright, a woman who had almost died in the snow stood taller than any storm could reach. Red Hollow didn't sleep easy after that. Word had spread fast. Through the saloon, across the few remaining shops, even to the old miners in the hills. Some saw Eleanor as a hero. Others saw her as trouble walking on 2 legs. But Silas saw her for what she was. The kind of woman storms couldn't bury. The telegraph reply came 2 days later. The land office confirmed receipt of the message. A federal agent had been dispatched. They were reviewing the map's legitimacy and expected to send men within a week. It sounded good on paper, but Silas knew better. Burroughs, or whoever's behind this, he told Eleanor. They won't wait for a courtroom. They'll try to end this before your name ever reaches ink. Eleanor didn't flinch. Then we stay ready. They stayed close to town, moved during daylight, avoided open roads. Every evening, they returned to the small room above the saloon. Not safe, not hidden, but together. And in that narrow space, something quiet bloomed. Not passion, not yet, but peace. The kind only found in people who faced death and decided life was still worth sharing. One morning, Eleanor found Silas outside the stables, teaching a wide-eyed boy how to tie a proper pack knot. She leaned against the post and watched, the way he bent slightly to meet the boy's eye level, the way he explained with few words, but infinite patience, the way his voice was softer now. When the boy ran off, Silas turned and caught her watching. "What?" he asked. She smiled. "You used to be a ghost in the hills. Now you're giving lessons to stable hands." He shrugged, a hint of a smile curling. "Guess you're turning me into someone worth meeting." She stepped forward slowly, the air between them warm, despite the snow still lining the hills. "Maybe you were always worth meeting," she said. "Just had to wait for the right storm to bring you down." He reached out, brushed a wind-tangled strand of hair from her face. Neither of them moved for a moment. Then Eleanor whispered, "I'm not afraid anymore." And Silas leaned in, slowly, carefully, until their foreheads touched. "I was," he said. Then he kissed her, soft, steady. The kind of kiss that didn't ask for forever, but promised to stay anyway. That night, the stars came out clear above Red Hollow. And beneath them, in a room that smelled of pine soap and worn boots, love rooted itself in quiet soil, not with fireworks, but with firelight, and shared breath. But across the ridge, in a camp just beyond view, another fire burned. A man in a gray coat unfolded a copy of the map, sneering. "The agent's already moving," he said to his hired men. "We stop that before it gets too far." One of them spit into the dirt. "They've got protection now." The man grinned. "So do we." He stood, kicked snow over the flames, and whispered into the wind. "No map, no witness, no mercy." The next sunrise would come. But it wouldn't come in peace, because war wasn't a battlefield. It was a mountain pass, a wire tap, a hidden gun, and at the center of it all stood a woman who'd survived the blizzard, and a man who had no plans to ever let her fall again. The federal agent arrived 3 days later, not in a wagon, not with an escort, but alone, on horseback, wearing a long oilskin coat and a badge clipped to his belt that read U.S. Land Office Enforcement Division. His name was Walter Emmett, and he spoke with the dry tone of a man who'd read too many reports and trusted too few people. He met Eleanor and Silas in the telegraph office. A single oil lamp flickering overhead. "I've seen the copy," Emmett said, unfolding her map. "If this holds up, it could shut down a dozen active mines and cost some very powerful men a great deal of money." Eleanor nodded. "That's why they want me gone." Emmett glanced up. They? Whoever hired the men that burned down a cabin. Who tracked me through the snow. Who nearly killed me. Emmett studied her a moment longer, then turned to Silas. And you're the one who pulled her out of it? I'm the one who's staying, Silas said simply. Emmett nodded once. Then let's move fast. I'm headed to the regional court in Granite Ridge. We'll present this as evidence in a federal land claim dispute. Eleanor hesitated. That's still 2 days east. We leave at first light, Emmett replied. That night, Silas and Eleanor packed quietly in their room. She folded the original map into a hidden pocket inside her coat. Silas oiled his rifle. Neither one said much. Not out of tension, but out of knowing. They were stepping into the final stretch. Not just toward justice, but toward danger at full gallop. Before bed, Eleanor reached for Silas's hand. If anything happens, he cut her off gently. You're not doing this alone, she exhaled. I'm not afraid for me. I'm afraid for you. He smiled, rough and real. I've faced wolves, rock slides, and 2 winters with no flour. I can face men in suits. They rode out at dawn. Eleanor, Silas, and Agent Emmett. The road to Granite Ridge was steep and narrow, winding through old canyons and frost-touched pines. They made camp beneath an outcrop the first night. Their horses tethered tight, fire low. But as Silas stood the second watch, he heard something he hadn't heard in weeks. 2 riders, distant, silent. He woke Emmett. We've got company. Eleanor stirred. Should we move? No, Emmett said, standing. We wait. Set a trap. By morning, the riders appeared. Calm, dressed like traders, but too clean for mountain folk. They approached slow, hands raised. Looking for a woman, one called. Goes by Marsh. We mean her no harm. Silas stepped forward, rifle in hand. She's not here. The man smiled, tight-lipped. We've got orders. No need for blood. Emmett stepped beside Silas. You just made a mistake, he said, flipping open his badge. The riders didn't blink, but they didn't back down either. Then, quietly, the man said, Orders came from someone bigger than Washington. Bigger than you. Walk away now, Agent. Silas raised the rifle. You walk away. Now. And this time, they did. Not quickly, but with the slow certainty of men who intended to return. They broke camp at once, riding fast through the canyon. Mud flying, hooves pounding like war drums. By late afternoon, Granite Ridge appeared below them. Sharp roofs, courthouse spire, and a U.S. flag snapping in the wind. Eleanor looked down, her breath catching. We made it. Silas reached over, placed a hand over hers. You didn't just make it, Eleanor. You brought the truth with you. But below them, in the dusty edges of town, those same 2 riders were already watching. And somewhere, seated in a velvet chair, behind a desk of polished oak, a name no one dared speak, had already signed orders to erase everything. The map, the case, and the woman brave enough to carry it. The courtroom doors would open soon. But the real battle had only just begun. Granite Ridge was no stranger to legal fights. Land, cattle, mining rights. But it hadn't seen anything like this in years. By the time Eleanor, Silas, and Agent Emmett stepped inside the stone courthouse, news had already traveled faster than horses. People lined the corridor, whispering, leaning on door frames, peering over banisters. They weren't just curious. They were waiting to see who'd win, truth or money. Judge Alden Price presided. A gray-haired man with a scar on his temple and an expression carved from oak. He'd seen enough lies to smell them before they were spoken. Emmett submitted the original map into evidence. "This document," he said, "is proof of illegal mining operations on protected land. It has cost lives. It has been hidden, stolen, and nearly destroyed." He gestured to Eleanor. "And the only reason it's here is because of Miss Marsh." All eyes turned to her. Eleanor stood. No fear in her voice, no apology in her posture. "My father drew those lines. He died trying to protect what was right. I ran because I was scared. I'm here now because I'm done being scared." Silas, seated behind her, didn't blink. Because in that moment, she didn't need protection. She was fire on her own. The defense stood next. Two men in finely tailored coats, with ink-stained hands and hollow words. They questioned the map's age, suggested Eleanor forged it, hinted she was a paid provocateur, sent to stir trouble during a mining dispute. Judge Price cut through the noise. "Do you have proof she forged it?" "No, Your Honor." "Then sit down and stop dancing." For 2 days, the hearing continued. Miners testified. Trappers gave maps of their own. A historian confirmed the handwriting matched Eleanor's father, and every time a shadow of doubt crept near, Eleanor stood and met it head-on. Silas rarely spoke, but every time she sat down, his hand found hers. Strong, steady, reminding her that whatever came, she didn't face it alone. On the third morning, just before the final ruling, the doors burst open. A federal courier rushed in, handed Emmett a sealed envelope. The courtroom hushed as he read it, then passed it to the judge. Price raised a brow. "This is unusual," he muttered. Then he looked at Eleanor. "Miss Marsh, it seems your message reached more than just this court. Washington has taken notice. They're ordering a full federal investigation into all mining claims in the Northern Range, effective immediately." A gasp rippled through the room, and Silas, quiet, unmoved, finally allowed himself a small, proud smile. Eleanor's shoulders sank, not in defeat, but relief. She had done it, but the ruling wasn't the end. Outside, as the courtroom emptied, a single shot rang out. Crack! The glass window beside the courthouse door shattered. People screamed. Horses scattered. Silas yanked Eleanor to the ground, covering her body with his. He rolled once, rifle drawn, eyes scanning the rooftops. Agent Emmett shouted, "Shooter! Roof of the smithy!" A man in gray darted across the shingles, then disappeared into the back alley. Chaos erupted, but no one was hurt. Eleanor sat up, heart pounding, her coat torn at the shoulder. Silas cupped her face. "You all right?" She nodded, breath shallow. "They're still trying." He helped her up. "Let them try. The law's listening now." That night, under tight guard, Eleanor stood in a boarding house window overlooking Granite Ridge. The stars looked brighter, the wind gentler. Silas stood beside her, his arms around her waist. "You're not done running," he said, "but now you're not running alone." She leaned her head against his chest. "No," she whispered. Now I'm walking forward. With you. And behind them, folded on the table, was the map. No longer a secret, now a symbol of land, of justice, and of a love born not in softness, but in storm. The federal investigation rolled through the northern range like a slow-moving thunderhead. Surveyors, marshals, lawyers, every mine, every claim, every dusty land record from the last 20 years was pulled into the light. Some were cleared, most weren't. Shafts were shut down. Titles revoked. One by one, the names behind the fraud began to surface. Some powerful, some forgotten, but all guilty of building fortunes on buried truth. And Eleanor Marsh, she became more than a name. She became a witness with teeth. She and Silas didn't return to Red Hollow, didn't retreat into the hills. Instead, they stayed in Granite Ridge, rented a small place on the edge of town, where the woods met the road, where the porch faced west. "We could go," Silas said one morning as he carved fence posts. "Back into the mountains, you and me. Just disappear." Eleanor stood nearby, arms crossed, watching wildflowers sway. "I'm done disappearing," she said. "We're not hiding. We're living." He looked at her, strong, sunlit, steady, and nodded. "Then we live here. You, me, maybe a few chickens." She smiled. "And what? A goat named after your worst enemy?" Silas chuckled. "We'll name it Burrows. Let it yell at nothing all day." 1 month later, the trial of 2 company bosses began in Denver. Eleanor was called to testify. She stood in a packed courtroom, the map sealed behind glass, and spoke without hesitation. Not about revenge, but about truth. About her father. About the men who burned the forest, trying to keep her silent. And she spoke of Silas, though not by name, as the one who reminded me that quiet strength is the hardest to shake. The verdicts came swiftly. Guilty. It made headlines across the territory. And somewhere in a room, filled with oak bookshelves and polished boots, a final signature was made. The land stays protected. The map stays preserved. And Eleanor Marsh is no longer a fugitive. She is a guardian. Back in Granite Ridge, spring came late, but fierce. The garden behind their little house bloomed. The porch got new railings. And one morning, Eleanor handed Silas a small envelope. He opened it, frowned. "What's this?" "Land deed," she said softly. "Signed over to us. 40 acres, stretching into the foothills." He looked up slowly. "This your way of proposing?" She raised a brow. "Do you need me to say the words?" He dropped the envelope, took her face in his hands, and kissed her, like the wind had just brought her back from the edge again. "No," he whispered. "I heard it loud and clear." They were married that summer. No guests, no preacher, just them. A hillside of wild lupine, and a carved wooden sign beside their gate that read, "Boone and Marsh, home built by storm." Eleanor didn't stop writing. She sent letters east, helped file land protection orders, and worked with agents who wanted to do the right thing. Silas didn't stop carving. He built sheds, rebuilt a cabin, rebuilt himself, and every evening they sat together in quiet, not the kind born of fear, but the kind earned through surviving. Because in a world where maps could start wars, two hearts had learned how to draw their own lines. Not for gold, not for power, but for each other. Years passed, but the wind still moved through the pines, the same way it had the day Eleanor nearly died on that mountain. Low, steady, full of something wild and alive. She never forgot that wind, and she never forgot the man who pulled her from it. Their home in the foothills grew, not just in fences or fields, but in moments. Simple ones. Mornings with coffee by the window. Midday rides through the flowering valleys. Evenings where Silas sat whittling by the fire, while Eleanor read aloud from old journals and land records, still piecing together lost truths for others who needed them. She didn't just guard land anymore. She preserved legacy. And Silas? He protected her peace, like he once protected her life. One autumn, a rider arrived at their gate with a letter, wax-sealed and bearing the crest of the U.S. Land Office. Inside was an invitation. Eleanor Marsh was to be honored in Denver. A recognition ceremony for her role in exposing one of the largest illegal mining operations in Western history. She laughed when she read it aloud. "You think I should go?" Silas leaned on the porch rail, watching the sun dip low over the trees. "You already changed the world once," he said. "No harm in letting them thank you for it." They traveled together, this time by carriage, not under threat, but with dignity. Eleanor wore her father's old compass on a chain. Silas wore a cleaned-up coat that still smelled faintly of cedar and firewood. At the ceremony, her name was read before a full hall. They spoke of justice, of courage, but when she stepped to the podium, Eleanor said only this: "Maps tell you where something is, but it's love that tells you where to stay." And I stayed, because someone believed in me when I wasn't sure I could survive. She glanced toward Silas in the crowd. He didn't smile big. He never did. But he tipped his hat, and her heart answered it like a promise. Back home, the seasons turned again. A boy was born the following spring, with Silas's steady eyes and Eleanor's quiet fire. They named him Alden, after the judge who refused to bow to power. Their life wasn't grand, but it was honest, rooted, and it held a kind of peace no court ruling could give. Sometimes, Eleanor would still take the old map out of its drawer, brittle now, but intact, and trace the red slashes with her finger. Not because she needed to remember, but because it reminded her how far they'd come. From blizzards, from betrayal, from the edge of loss to the warmth of home. And every time the wind came down the ridge, Silas would pause, just for a moment, and look toward the trees, not in fear, but in thanks, because the storm hadn't taken her. It had brought her